The assault at Pointe du Hoc is one of the most incredible feats of D-Day. At every turn, the US Army Rangers tasked with eliminating the German gun battery at Pointe du Hoc faced unexpected challenges. Yet somehow they were able to overcome the odds and accomplish their mission, enduring days of brutal combat and suffering a staggering 70% casualty rate in the process. In case you're not familiar, Pointe du Hoc is a promontory on which a German 155mm gun battery was positioned. Just recently, I visited Normandy for the 81st D-Day anniversary, and of course, Pointe du Hoc was very high on my list of sites I wanted to visit during my trip. On the anniversary date, I was able to go to Pointe du Hoc to walk where those brave men had fought and take a look at that battlefield firsthand. So now let's jump over to the bluffs of Pointe du Hoc with Dr. Jared Frederick, history professor and host of the YouTube channel Real History, so we can talk a bit about the physical and operational obstacles that the US Army Rangers faced during their daring mission 81 years ago. Here we are at Pointe du Hoc. We are standing in front of one of the German bunkers right at the top of the cliffs here. So Jared, why don't you tell us a little bit about the significance of where we're standing?
So Pointe du Hoc is one of the truly unique features of the Normandy battle landscape. And it's really worthy of a movie in and of itself. There's a portion of it that is depicted in The Longest Day, but we really only get a quick snapshot of this iconic act of heroism that transpires here. The 2nd Ranger Battalion had been taken command of by this rather colorful officer by the name of James Earl Rudder. With the help and supervision of British commandos in the United Kingdom in the year leading up to the Normandy invasion, they had modeled this fighting force off of the British commandos. And the reason why the Americans aren't called commandos is that Eisenhower thought that sounded a bit too British. Eisenhower was a very devout reader of American Western novels, and so he thought Rangers sounded a little bit more indicative of American character.
He was right
in that regard. Yes, so very, very much so. But the reason why it is determined why the 155mm guns have to be taken out here is that it's a position that's located pretty much smack dab between Omaha beaches and Utah beaches. And so these heavy guns can lodge a projectile many, many miles, and those beaches are well within range of here, and therefore these guns have to be decommissioned as a result. And so the great drama transpires right here before us, 81 years ago today. For those who are well versed in the story of D-Day, you'll know that some of the Army Rangers are diverted to Omaha Beach, and they land not too far away from where we were at the Verville Draw.
Right.
This was supposed to be their main thrust, though. This was supposed to be their key target. But delays, confusion, poor timing leads some of them being sent to Omaha Beach. And about 225 of them will ultimately be sent to this spot. And of course, the most famous part of all of this is the shooting of the grapple hooks, or at least the attempt to shoot grapple hooks up on top of here. Unlike what we see in The Longest Day, they actually had the grapple hooks shot out from mortar tubes that were affixed to British landing craft that were coming in. And one thing that the Rangers didn't take into account is that the rope that was attached to the grapple hooks had become waterlogged, and the rope was heavier than they anticipated, and therefore many of the grapple hooks fell short of their intended target, lodging into the side of this cliff. So right from the get-go, they are confronting some major problems, but they're Rangers, and they improvise.
Right. And
they start to use the buddy system. They start to tie rope together. They start to fix ladders in 3-foot sections. And so bit by bit, almost like Legos, they just keep working their way slowly and slowly up the cliff. One area where pre-naval and aerial bombardments did succeed was here, because what those bombardments did is that they knocked out a good chunk of the top of the cliff. Those rocks fell down, and it kind of created a natural embankment for the men to run up. And so perhaps instead of 100 feet, they might have only had 50 or 75 feet to climb in some places. But they are doing so while they are under fire, of course.
Right.
And And so the one key problem is that after they are able to remove the Germans from these advanced positions in this command bunker that we have right here, they start looking for the guns, which is their main objective. And here they have another problem. They find out that the guns aren't here. And so some of them get particularly adventurous, including two gentlemen by the name of Len Lamel and Jack Kuhn. And so they proceed into hedgerow country about a kilometer to our south, and they find the majority of the 155 millimeter guns largely unattended. And they said that they noticed there might have been 50 or 60 Germans, in the vicinity, but they said that they were all sort of clustered together trying to decide what to do. And so I think it speaks to the level of confusion and the sort of shock and awe that some of the Germans were experiencing in that moment. And so with great stealth and great drama, Kuhn and Lamel go to the guns, and with thermite grenades, they shove them in the gears and the machinery of the artillery. And they ignite them. The thermite grenades, they aren't like a typical grenade which, blow up with explosive force. They turn white hot, and, they can melt anything. And so they're able to dismantle most of these guns right under the noses of, a full battery of German operators. So like I said, that happens about a kilometer to our south. And that was a point that was later believed to have been inspected by Dwight Eisenhower when he came to Normandy in the weeks after the fighting. But now there's another problem, because now the Germans are counterattacking, and they are going to do so in fairly considerable force. And I think in many ways, people, they think the drama of this battle happens solely here at the water's edge.
Yeah, the scaling of the bluffs, that's always what
But
you
it
hear
wasn't until the morning of June 8th that elements of the 29th Infantry Division come to relieve the men of the 2nd Ranger Battalion. Colonel Rudder is using this bunker as his command post. They're trying to take care of wounded as best they can. They're running low on ammunition. And at one point, the Rangers, for lack of anything else to shoot, one or two of them just start shooting flare guns at the Germans for no other reason than to try to scare them off ever so slightly. One of them admitted to this in a Stars and Stripes interview after the fact. So things are getting pretty desperate when you're just shooting star shells out of spite at the Germans. But this is as desperate as it gets. This is a desperate 48-hour action where you have 200 plus American soldiers with their backs to the sea, cut off, no way to escape. But they are able to prevail. And like I said, that's as dramatic as it gets.
It really is. It's incredible walking around here. I think the landscape here really bears the scars of that battle, more so than we were just over at Omaha. And there, if you didn't know the history of it, you could almost be oblivious to the fact that a battle happened there at all. But here you talked about the bombardment that took place, and there's evidence of that everywhere you look. These massive craters all around the path from those naval and aerial bombardment as well, right?
Of all the places in Normandy, this is one of the points of the landscape that is most pronounced in that regard. And there's even aerial photographs from 1944, including with some marauders flying over, and you see some of their bombs landing here in the channel. They didn't quite hit their target. So even then, it was quite apparent that this was a heavily scarred landscape.
While we were walking around Pointe du Hoc on June 6th, we met plenty of people from all around the world who had traveled there for the 81st anniversary of D-Day, including some World War Wisdom subscribers. I even met a couple modern-day US Army Rangers and got this picture with them at the top of the bluffs, which goes insanely hard. This anniversary was a big deal, with leaders and politicians from across the globe traveling to Normandy for the anniversary. Naturally, this anniversary made countless headlines, and it was interesting for me to see how these ceremonies were being covered in the media while they were taking place, something I was easily able to keep track of using today's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is a news comparison website and app that helped me immediately understand how stories around this anniversary were being covered. Over 240 sources from around the world reported on this story, with the majority of coverage, 64%, coming from outlets close to center. But we can see that 16% of the coverage comes from left-leaning sources and 20% from right-leaning sources. I thought the reporting around this anniversary would be pretty straightforward, but that split made me wonder how the story was being covered across the political spectrum. When I compared the coverage, some left-leaning outlets focus on the treatment of our veterans today under the Trump administration in their reporting about D-Day, while some right-leaning outlets focused on U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who traveled to Normandy for the ceremonies. Same story, but very different framing. My favorite Ground News feature is the blind spot feed, which shows you stories disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. It's the best way to break out of your echo chamber and see news that you otherwise wouldn't see. I love Ground News because it shows how one story is being covered across the political and geographic spectrum, so you can see and understand the bias instead of being misled by it. In a world where algorithms dictate what we see and everyone seems to be trying to sway your opinion, Ground News is an easy way to break the bubble and stay informed without all the extra noise. Subscribe to Ground News to get 40% off the Vantage plan by scanning this QR code on screen or using my link ground.news/worldwarwisdom. Investing in yourself and staying informed always pays off. That's ground.news/worldwarwisdom. Now that we covered the backstory and some highlights of the battle at Pointe du Hoc, let's walk inside of that bunker we were just standing in front of to see an example of some of the fortifications that the U.S. Army Rangers were up against on this daring assault. This is the main observation bunker at the tip of Pointe du Hoc, and as soon as I went to enter the bunker, I got a reminder of just how dangerous it must have been for the U.S. Army Rangers trying to attack it. As soon as you approach the bunker, you're greeted by a machine gun port positioned close to the ground to gun down any troops headed to the bunker's entrance. Troops who made it past that to the actual bunker entrance would end up face to face with a second machine gun port that has a full view of the stairwell leading to the sealed bunker doors.
When you walk around these sites, you really get a sense of the engineering that's put into them. You have a machine gun position here, you have a machine gun position at the bottom of the steps. The one at the bottom of the steps is riddled with bullet holes, and even with the air vents, you can see that there is a downward slope to them, so it's a lot more difficult to try to throw grenades or any other nasty stuff in there to hinder the occupants. So a lot of thought went into the creation of these.
I can't imagine trying to overtake a fortification like this that was so carefully designed to kill anyone trying to attack it. Reportedly, even though the Rangers were successful in knocking out some of the machine guns in that bunker and pouring fire into the bunker using those machine gun ports, it wasn't till the day after the invasion that they were able to fully clear the Germans out of that bunker using satchel charges. That bullet and grenade damage that Jared pointed out outside continued into the inner rooms of this bunker, and many of the wooden ceilings were scorched from the attack. I often hear people assume that those scorched ceilings are from flamethrowers used on that bunker. That is totally possible, but I also wouldn't be surprised if those are from fires started by other incendiary weapons, like thermite grenades. After exploring those inner rooms, we moved on to the bunker's main observation room. This is the room overlooking the sea with that domed roof that Jared and I were standing in front of a minute ago. Funny enough, while we were recording that scene in front of the bunker, somebody inside the bunker was pelting my legs with rocks through that little viewport, and I did not expect to be on the receiving end of fire from that bunker during my visit. Looking out of this observation bunker, you really get a sense for how exposed the incoming landing craft would have been on D-Day. In fact, at least 2 of the landing craft used by the Rangers were completely destroyed before ever making it to the shore. After exploring that bunker, we walked around some of the 155mm gun positions, which, as we covered, had no actual guns in them on D-Day since the guns had been moved. Now those positions are completely empty, but on D-Day, some of them had telephone poles sticking out of them that were painted to look like gun barrels to make it seem like the guns were still there. I can't imagine scaling those bluffs and fighting your way to your objective only to realize that it had been replaced by a telephone pole. It was also here that US soldiers were fighting off the German counterattacks that we mentioned earlier. This bunker network is not all that large, so those Rangers really had their backs to the sea as they were fighting off those German attacks in the days following D-Day.
So when the Germans counterattack, the Americans have to, their lines regress back into this general vicinity, and this is sort of near the outward point where they will meet the German onslaught. And just to give you some perspective, I mean, the Germans were over there in that bunker, and they were in firefights with Americans who were in this rough vicinity. So there's a lot of give and take that was going on here.
It was so helpful to have Jared along to point out some of the sites and share some stories about the battle at Pointe du Hoc. Please go make sure you're subscribed to his YouTube channel, Real History, to see more great content from him. Real like movie reel. He does historical movie breakdowns on there. If you're a history nerd like me, you'll love it. During our visit, I was also surprised to learn that Jared had personal connections to some of the Rangers who fought at Pointe du Hoc. So of course I made him share some of those stories with us to get an idea of what those men were like when they weren't on the battlefield.
Yeah, so Jack Coon, along with Len Lamel, one of the individuals who spikes a gun much like this just a little bit further down the road, he was actually from my hometown, and several of my childhood friends knew him during their upbringing. And in fact, there were 4 men from this Ranger Battalion who were from my home area, and they included Jack Coon, Vince Hagg, who I knew personally, Sheldon Bear, who I knew personally, and then also Roy Miles, who was the grandfather of one of the students that I taught in one of my classes. But there are many fantastic stories about Jack Coon. This was a man who you did not want to trifle with. Because not only was he a member of this Ranger Battalion, but he also became a Marine during the Korean War. He was like a black belt in karate and jiu-jitsu, and then he became our city police chief in Altoona, Pennsylvania, in the decades after the war. And some of the bit of lore about him that I can't confirm or deny is that he smuggled his Thompson submachine gun home after the war and had it hanging on the wall of his office at the Altoona Police Department. And whenever there was a drug bust or a raid or something like that, he would break it out and brandish it into service once again. But something that I can confirm that was told to a dear mutual friend of mine, he asked Jack one day, Jack, you were an Army Ranger, you're a D-Day veteran, you were in the Marine Corps, you're in these 2 realms of badassery. And then you were a police chief for a number of years. He asked him, what was the most difficult of your jobs? And Jack said, oh, definitely when I was a school bus driver, driving my friends to school. And our mutual friend was somewhat taken aback by this answer and slightly surprised. And he said, well, how come being a bus driver was the most difficult job? And Jack very calmly said, I could kill anybody in my 3 other jobs. He couldn't do that, though, as a school bus driver.
No,
so
certainly not.
It says a lot about some of the people I was hanging out with in my younger years. So I think that's a great story to end with because it shows us that these people were human. They had a sense of humor. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Jack Coon, I actually have an interview of him from 1984 when he came to revisit here. You can check that out on Real History.
You heard the man. Go check it out.
Thank you all so much for coming along with me to experience this historic battlefield, and a special thank you to my Hotshot tier supporters on Patreon. Anthony Marcinkus, Corey Mahler, Emily Hensley, NCR Trooper Scout, World War Historian 22, and Yichian C. You guys make it possible for me to go on cool trips like this, and I really appreciate your support. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Keep an eye out for those pesky machine gun ports, and I'll see you in the next one.